Flat Earth Social. Meet others on the same level.
Come and join the truth revolution.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please take your seats and prepare yourself for the evening's entertainment? Okay, firstly, thank you and welcome back to another Flat Earth Social number 41. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your continued support. It's amazing to see the numbers we get here. We really appreciate it. Now, last month, I left you in the capable hands of Mark Sargent. Those of you that are here, we had a fantastic interview with Mark, learned a few new things, really nice. And he told us a couple of things about a show that he was going to be on, a mainstream streaming show, a big streaming platform as a flat earther. So I asked him today, is there any sort of updates? There is not too much to report, other than that he's done the show medical, the site evaluation, all his driving skills, a few other things, and he was fitted for a uniform. So I have no idea what this show is going to be. It's going to be, and filming starts incredibly soon. He also spoke about Artemis. Do you remember that? Earlier this year, we had our thing, and then it was on April the 1st, because they obviously think it didn't go very well at all, did it? I mean, launching April Fool's Day, and because, you know, the images started coming back. Did you see those images of Earth? All wrong dimensions, depths, the countries were missing. It was awful. I ran all of those images through whether they've been modified or not. And they all came back between 78 and 84% modified, every single one that they did. So utter rubbish, utter rubbish. And then, of course, we had the green screen fails. Do you remember those with the hat and the toy? And literally everything about this NASA faking stuff was done on this mission. It was terrible. And then, of course, because obviously the astronauts, some of them were actors. Did you see that? Yeah. Did you see that too? The woman Cock, my mistake. And there was someone called Lover in there, Glover, so Cock Glover or something. It worked out. I don't know. Very, very strange. She was in the film Mad Max, in the remake of Mad Max, and the black guy was in the first series of Fallout. Who'd have thought? That's how bad it is. Obviously, it's a dreadful Masonic evil that they do, and the number 33 is so apparent in this particular mission. I'll go through a couple of things. The way they use this number, 3.3 million pounds of thrust for the booster, 3.3. Then there was 330 cubic space where they could live on that thing. The capsule was 3.3 meters high. Their personal belongings could be no more than 3.3 pounds in weight. They had 3.3 pounds of water per second for the thrusters. They all had an Omega X33 watch. Artemis 2 in gematria adds up to what number? 33, that's right. And there was 33,000 pounds of thrust required in space to get it through, of course. And of course, the rocket was 322 feet long, which is 322 skull and bones, right? So that's pretty much what happened as far as that's concerned. Terrible, terrible, terrible. To make things worse, they had a magic phone call from Donald Trump. There you go. And the war's obviously going very, very well. I think last week they closed the Strait of Hormuz. And an hour later they opened it. Then they closed it. Then they opened it and closed it for 2 days. Load of nonsense. And of course, later in this month we've just had, there was a shooting. Did anybody see that in the States? Unbelievable. Polk County in Florida. The man that shot someone was a conspiracy theorist. A conspiracy theorist. And they made full point on national news to say he was a flat earther. So they're targeting us with being a crazy murdering people now. And then, of course, we had St. George's Day, and in this country, it's the only place you can get into prison for displaying a flag. Crazy stuff. Then, of course, we had another attempted assassination of President Trump. It's the third time. Didn't know that. Pam Bondi, did you see the interview before? Pam Bondi was there in the gala saying, oh, yes, it's going to be great. He's on form and shots will definitely be fired tonight. Unbelievable. Then they had the thing. And to be fair, Trump's a big old lump of lard. How are they missing him? But to brighten up the day, Flat Earth is striving. It is going forward at an incredible rate these days. You may have seen a post I put up, which I want to talk a little bit about now. It was our very own David Weiss in a picture with Jamie Ike from David Ike and Jamie Ike and all the rest of them from the Iconic brand. Now, I had an email on the 12th of March from Jamie Ike. It said basically, hi, I'm doing a documentary. I'd like you to come up for filming, is this and that. And I'm thinking, you know, the Ike people? Well, turns out Jamie's woken up to it for about 4 months. And he's obviously at that point where he's losing his mind and everything's going great. And he's desperate to do a documentary. So luckily enough, myself, David Weiss, right now, I think this week he's going to see Alex, who's our guest next month here. And next month we've got a film crew here. So they're obviously going to be doing the thing for the documentary. So can't wait to see you all here again. It should be a really big one. So there's that. And I think Jamie's up here on the 25th doing some bits, and then he's going to come in on for the 26th for the actual thing. So it should be a packed house, should be good. And don't forget your tickets to the Guru Gathering in Spain. Now, there's a lot of us that went last time. We got a bass player. Big round up, Lee Jasper, bass player of the band that's going to be featured over there. It's going to be an amazing thing this September, including the wraparound event, which is hosted by the Manuals. And Alex is going to be here next month live to tell us all about it. And the documentary, the Flat Earth documentary, is actually going to be premiered in Spain. I don't think it was originally going to, but I think he found out that this thing was going on and he was quite happy to show the premiere there. So if you do get there, you get that as well. Should be a bit of a giggle. Now, don't forget your tickets for it. You'll have to go onto Alex's website. It's also on the Telegram group that we have, and get yourselves out there. Now, this is where you can also meet our next guest. Ooh, that LinkedIn girl, that's what I thought. Now, I met Mike last September for the first time at the first Guru Gathering. I've been aware of Mike's work from Stellium 7 for a number of years, and I've followed him ever since. He's an author, hacker, researcher, flat earther, and studier of something that he's coined called biogeology. It's going to blow your mind if you've not touched this subject before. So, without further ado, please would you give a rapturous welcome for our guest, Mr. Mike Wilkerson. Hey! Hey, Mike, can you just give me a shout?
Hey, everybody.
Excellent. Hold on.
Can you hear me? Hear me okay?
We can, Mike. Can you get your mic nearer to you and turn up your volume, please?
Sure. How's that? Is that better?
Your volume would be better if you could turn it right up, Mike.
Ooh, not sure how to do that. Hold on. Let me check my audio settings. Huh. Microphone.
Maybe just shout, Mike.
Audio settings. Where are they? Sound control panel. Recording.
Can we all hear Mike? Is that okay? Can we hear Mike or not?
Configure. Not sure how to boost it. If I was in
That's
OBS,
good, Mike.
I would.
We've done it. I'll put the microphone to the thing. You're good. You're loud as anything.
Oh.
Michael,
right.
welcome to us here at Flat Earth Social. Let me just get this camera onto our lovely people there. There you go.
Hey, everybody.
Mike, the floor's yours.
Oh, there. Now I can see the room.
Mike,
All
if
right.
you can just explain a little bit about who you are and what you do, that'd be fantastic.
Well, you just did that pretty well. I work in Spain as a chiropractor. I've been here for 15 years and friends with Alex Michael for the last 10 of those. And yeah, he got me thinking about crazy stuff a long time ago. And I'm still trying to recover, basically. So what else? You mentioned hacker, former hacker, not a current hacker. reality hacker, I suppose, and just an incessant questioner. And I've been curious about things my whole life, and I like to ask unconventional questions, and sometimes leads you to unusual places. So that's definitely what happened with me, and why I'm here talking with you today.
Excellent, Mike. Mike, your speciality and your special subject is something that some of the people here have never touched upon, and many have. So Mike's got a fantastic presentation to give us. So Mike, I'm going to give the floor over to you to go with your presentation. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mike.
Sounds good. All right, so you should see my PowerPoint at this point, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's see, I'll just get rid of those so you can see the whole screen. Yeah, so rebel geology, just, the idea that maybe things aren't what we were taught. And I've been examining this ever since Alex got me questioning, excuse me, the shape of the earth. And, as you go down that rabbit hole, you find that it's deep and wide and touches on all kinds of different subjects. So once I'd done that pretty thoroughly, I started asking the question of, well, if something so big as the earth itself could be lied about, then what else have we been lied to about? And the answer is basically everything, I think. In one way or another, it's an inversion or a warping or a turning inside out. And I think geology is no different. So I coined the term biogeology some years ago because I was looking for a placeholder term to just distinguish between alternative narratives when it comes to geology and what we've been taught in the mainstream. And so you'll see as we get into this that there's a whole lot to suggest that there's a much more direct connection between biology and geology than what we were taught. And we're going to start with a little crash course in geology. I think most of us in the room are aware of this. Wait, it's not. Hello. Strange, it's just staying on the one screen there. Are you just seeing the green, or are you seeing the big bang at this point? All right, let me just exit the, oh no, there we go. No. Here we go. Okay, now we got it. All right, that should be the big bang, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we grow up learning about, and the idea that everything came from nothing, exploded, and created the known universe, and then all of these different particles bounced around and eventually formed suns and our Earth, and that's the story, that this happened 16 billion years ago, plus or minus, and that's intimately tied to what we've been taught about the age of the Earth, which they put at something like 4.6 billion years. And we have all these different eras that they know about because they're looking at the layers geologically and looking at fossils, and this is what we're going to be questioning today. So even in the mainstream narrative, they talk about resets, these great dyings off that occurred, and in the mainstream model, they talk about 5 different great resets. The most recent being the one that happened 65 million years ago when an asteroid struck and wiped out the dinosaurs, and luckily they turned into crude oil, or we wouldn't be able to fuel our lives. And yeah, so basically this is what we were given, and glad it's getting a laugh because it is a joke in a variety of ways. And yeah, so this is just the basics of what they call the cycle of petrogenesis, which is where stone comes from according to the mainstream model. And so the way this works is that dead plant and animal life, they basically lay down after dying, and they compress into layers. And we call those sedimentary layers. And then as that pressure gets strong enough, it will cause a melting of those sedimentary layers, and then they become what's known as metamorphic rock. And that metamorphic rock is a lot denser and heavier and harder. But if the pressure is great enough, eventually that rock will melt. And at the core of the Earth, they tell us that it's magma, and that magma comes up through fissures in the Earth, and we call those volcanoes, and that gives us our igneous stone. And we know that igneous stone is formed in that fashion because we can see the lava coming out of active volcanoes to this day, and watch it cool and see what it does. And so this is just a fancier graphic for that, and showing that cycle of petrogenesis. So basically every form of stone on Earth is said to emerge in one way or another through that cycle. And when we look at the different layers, you can see these Cretaceous and the Jurassic and the Triassic. The reason they know how old the layer is because of the fossils that are found in the layer. And that leads to circular reasoning, because the reason they know how old the fossils are is based on the layer that they're found in. And you can see that the times that they're giving us are absolutely phenomenal as far as the numbers. The lowest layers there being billions of years old, or 500 million or 400 million. And obviously nobody can go back in time and witness these changes happening. We just have to accept it as fact, because how could tens of thousands of geologists have been wrong for so long? So this is what they call sedimentary layering. And again, they're saying that this is happening through a layering of dead plant and animal life over long, long periods of time. But this is easily debunked, and was as recently as the 80s, when Mount St. Helens erupted. And all of this that you see here formed in less than 6 hours. So you get these layerings that come as a result of the lahars, which is a mixture of water and volcanic ash from the volcano. And then there's these slurry flows that lead to this layering. So we'll just hear what an actual geologist has to say about this. You should hear sound now.
As the grains were being propelled over the...
Is the sound working?
Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay.
As the grains were being propelled over the surface in a slurry, the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process. So Mount St. Helens tells us something really interesting about how rapidly strata can form. There's even micro thin lamination in this deposit. It's remarkable.
So that's interesting if you think about the Ring of Fire and how many volcanoes are said to be on Earth. There are huge numbers that are given for underwater volcanoes as well. And the interesting thing about the Mount St. Helens area is not only do you get these layers, but you also have, sorry, did somebody say something?
No.
Oh, okay. You also have the petrified trees as well. So trees have petrified. I mean, we're talking the 80s. So, what is that? 50 years, there's petrified trees in that region as a result of the volcanic activity. So we know petrification is a fact, and you can go visit the petrified forests and buy little chunks of this stuff for yourself. You can see in the lower left there is a pine cone that's very large called the Araucaria mirabilis, which was formed in Argentina after a volcanic activity. So the trees that had these pine cones were buried in ash, and of course with volcanic activity you're going to get earthquakes and flooding, tsunamis, that sort of thing. And with high mineral content water and ash, you already have everything you need for petrification. And to the right, you see the opalization of a giant ammonite there. And opal, as we'll see later on in the presentation, is basically just an infusion of silica into the material, and anything can opalize. There are lots of anomalies in the geological record. This upper left obviously is a hammer that's embedded in stone. And when you look at the timelines of when they tell us that tools were invented and how long we've been using them, it just doesn't match because of how long it's said to take for things to petrify. And this boot on the right was found and x-rayed and shows the internal anatomy, the bones of the foot, which was still in the boot. And obviously the boot is not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years old. So in the course of looking into all of these subjects for the last several years, I've basically come to the conclusion that anything can petrify, and you'll see a lot of examples of this in this presentation. So being both biological and non-biological material, our body actually makes stones. The photo in the center there is a gallbladder that's got hundreds of gallstones in it. Stones can be formed in kidneys and gallbladders. In larger animals like horses and cows, they can have stones that are known as bezoars, which can reach the size of a baseball. So that's with, you know, today-sized creatures. And, you know, as you get into these topics, you butt up against things like giants and titans and a lot of stuff that we've been taught is mythology or fairy tale. But there's actually a lot of empirical evidence for those things. So stones are produced by the body. I theorized early on when I started looking into all this subject matter that anything that was fat in the body would petrify to quartz. And you can see that the brain there in the middle on the right has a chunk that's broken away. And you can see that inside that, the fatty material of the brain has become quartz. The one below is either whale or I think it's actually dolphin brain. And so we're taught in the mainstream model that soft tissue can't petrify. And the reason for that is that the bacteria and the larvae would eat away at the material long before the petrification process could occur. And in mainstream geology, the petrification process, just going back to this, if we think about petrified wood, the way this occurs in the mainstream model is that the wood is surrounded by mud, high mineral content waters, ash, and over long periods of time, usually they're talking about tens of thousands, even millions of years, the minerals that are in those substances are going to work their way into the tissues of the wood or whatever else is petrifying as the gas and the liquid are working their way out. That's known as paramineralization. That's the official story on how things petrify. I've come to the conclusion that there's a whole lot of different ways that they can petrify, and a whole lot faster. That was really what got me on this subject in the first place, was running across Mud Fossil University's channel, and he's talking about this idea of mud fossils and that things that are buried in mud, you know, in the right conditions can petrify in short amounts of time. I sent him a message at one point asking him how long would it take, and he said that he had petrified either chicken breast or chicken wing, I can't remember which, in as little as 6 months. And the way that he did it was he basically embedded the thing in mud and some salt water and ran a very mild current through this thing and just let it sit for months and months and had a fully petrified bit of chicken there when he was done. So that's already kind of a game changer, you know, narrative breaker for the mainstream model that you know, in a laboratory situation that things could petrify far more quickly. And then we have these other things, like you can see the jellyfish and all of their glorious detail there on the right. Those are also very, very soft. So how does something like that happen? Well, with mud fossils, the idea is that there's no oxygen for the bacteria or the larvae to thrive. So they're dead. They're not eating the material, and that material is just slowly absorbing the minerals. And so that is what he would call a mud fossil. And that would explain how soft tissue can petrify when the mainstream model tells us that it doesn't, because we get our bones and our skeletons and everything, but they're never talking about things like petrified organs or other soft tissue of the body. So another thing that debunks that timeline when it comes to petrified wood is laboratory experiments. There was one that was conducted where they dropped 7 different pieces of wood into volcanic waters that were hot and very rich in mineral. And after each year, they retrieved one of the bits of wood, and by the 7th year, it was fully stone. So if you introduce high mineral content waters, throw in some acidity, as you can see in the quote there, you've got already the conditions for petrification. But they've even sped it up more, where they've done an acid wash, soaked things in a silica solution, and silica is very, very prevalent in our environment, and then hit it with a furnace, 1400 degrees. It might sound like a lot, but a pyroclastic flow from a volcano can reach temperatures of up to 1500 degrees Celsius. And also the pyroclastic flows can, according to the mainstream model, can move at the speed of sound. So if you've ever been in a sauna that's really, really hot and like blown on your arm, you can practically burn your own skin just by blowing. So normally blowing might cool things down, but if you're in a really, really hot environment, the wind actually increases the intensity of the heat. So if we've got a pyroclastic flow with temperatures of 1500 degrees Celsius, then that could definitely do a lot to the material. And the other thing about the experiment is that they started looking at this artificially produced petrified wood under microscope, and what they found is it was indistinguishable from normal wood. They couldn't tell the difference. So that's in a 24-hour period of time. So take a listen to this here.
I'm about to show you 5 different examples of rock forming quickly. Then I'm going to ask you a question about a dinosaur bone I'm going to show at the end. From Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic, mineralized water went through these pipes and formed this in 80 years. Here's a spark plug in stone, no more than 20 to 40 years to form this. This little guy right here was put into a mineral springs in Karlovy Vary, and within just 6 weeks, it turned to stone. And this right here, this is the same material you find in stalactites and stalagmites in those caves that they say are millions of years old. This right here took 6 months to form. Here's the question. Here's a dinosaur vertebrae. If these right here can form in that length of time, anywhere between weeks to months to years, how long does it take to fossilize a dinosaur bone? If the creationists are right, then it's 4,500 years, no older. What do you think?
So obviously, dinosaurs, that's up for grabs. But even in the mainstream model, you've got megaflora and megafauna, where they're talking about a period of time, antediluvian, where the creatures were all far, far bigger. And this is pre-dinosaur, where you've got, dragonflies that could reach nearly 1 meter in size. So if a dragonfly could be 1 meter, how big would mammals be, right? It just starts to sound more like the fairy tales and the legends. Now, obviously, this thing on the screen is not a drivetrain from millions of years ago. So just seeing it in that condition tells you that even non-biological material can also start to undergo some pretty serious transformation. So, as I said, I've come to the conclusion that there's a whole lot of different ways that petrification can occur. Paramineralization is the one that I described first. High mineral content waters will also do it. I'll show some examples of that in a second. Lightning in the form of plasma. There's different experiments where they're turning things to stone and crystal using plasma. I'll show those as well. Volcanic ash mixed with high mineral content water. And then the mainstream model doesn't acknowledge biological transmutation, chemical or transmutation of elements through things like heat, right? We're taught that can only happen in the heart of suns or in nuclear furnaces or particle colliders, right? That that they can actually change the nature of atoms. But this is just patently false. Our bodies are constantly transmuting elements. The simplest explanation for how that can be so is the chicken egg. There were experiments that were done where they looked at the diet of the chicken and calculated how much of the calcium was in their diet. And it was far less that was in their diet than was in the chicken's, the eggshell. And this is not even counting the calcium needed to maintain the chicken's own bones. So clearly the chicken was producing calcium in some manner. You know, it's taking the different things that are in its diet, the mica, phosphorus, different elements, and the body is actually creating the calcium that's needed for the shell. They've also done experiments where they've got, they've taken like a small tree and put it in a pot with a certain amount of soil. They measure the weight of the pot and the soil and the tree before starting. They put it into a room, and they gave it only distilled water and sunlight for a period of years. And this thing grew and took on mass and was far heavier and larger than when it began. But it wasn't getting any minerals from the water because distilled water doesn't have them. And it was inside of a room. So all it was getting was the sunlight and the water. So transmutation of elements is a very important part of this whole thing. But it means we have to rethink and rework the entire periodic table of elements and how things actually work when it comes to chemistry. They can make artificial diamonds, rubies. I'll show you how in a moment. Yeah, so this is a lake called Lake Natron that's in, it's in Tanzania. And the interesting thing about this is it has extremely caustic waters. It's something like a pH of 13. And creatures fall in and they die very quickly. The only thing that can really survive the waters is flamingos, and they don't swim in them. They just walk around by the shore. And a photographer fished some of these animals out, and while they were still relatively soft, and positioned them for these photographs. But this is just another example. It's similar to Mother Shipton's Cave, which is there in the UK. People go and they hang objects from ropes, and the high mineral content waters drip down the ropes and surround these objects with, you know, an encasing, just like the teddy bear you saw in that video clip I showed a moment ago. And then eventually they'll harden all the way through. And then I mentioned plasma as a form of petrification. So if you think about plasma, this is you know, plasma arcing, where they're just using high voltage, need a little water so it doesn't just start burning up, but it forms this fractal pattern, which is realigning all of the stuff that doesn't burn off along these channels, these patterns that in a larger scale we call Lichtenberg figures. And so the largest plasma storms, ironically, are found over volcanoes. The volcanic ash is conductive, and it just amplifies that electrical activity. So we can imagine what the world would be like if, say, 1,000 volcanoes were going off at the same time, and some of the bigger ones. They talk about supervolcanoes as well. Whether or not those are real, I don't know. But the point is that we might have had a time where the entire sky was filled with so much ash that you couldn't see the sunlight, and you had just massive amounts of electrical activity. And one of the things that suggests that that's true is the prevalence of these Lichtenberg figures, which are found all over the world, and you can spot them on Google Earth. And the mainstream story is that these are being formed by water rivulets that are kind of working their way downhill and then forming larger and larger channels, and then eventually forming that primary main channel that you see in the center. I reject the notion. I think it's far more likely that this was formed through electrical activity, because that's exactly what happens. There's also what's known as fulgurites, where lightning strikes the sand on beaches, and it forms this kind of fractal pattern that reaches up out of the sand and is hardened. The biggest of the Lichtenberg figures in the world is the Grand Canyon. There's a lot of people who suggest that maybe this was formed through mining. I think what they probably did is they mined the novel elements that were created when the plasma hit and created the Grand Canyon. And the picture on the left is the largest plasma storm ever photographed.
Wow.
Heat will do it as well, or at least will start to create, you know, this melting, this transmutation. This guy is using a Fresnel's lens, which is just basically a big magnifying glass. And within a matter of seconds, the heat from the sun is enough. You can see how quickly that happens to turn this to liquid. That process is called vitrification. When that cools down, it looks like glass. Vitrified is just glassified. So there's also different examples of man-made petrification. I talked about the petrified wood, and we'll talk about well, you can grow opals. I've got different live streams where I've shown clips of different ways in laboratories that they can create opals. Rubies can be made in a microwave in seconds, and you'll see that in a moment. Now, the interesting thing about that is ruby is it's the second hardest on the hardness scale after diamond, and it can be made by just mixing some powders together and putting it in a microwave, and you'll see that in a moment. Coalification, biochar, this is basically just what happens to wood when it's put in an oxygen deficient environment and heated. The moisture works its way out, and eventually it'll turn to coal. So we get these coal seams that are massive. We have you know, Topher Gardner with his biochar. He's using these retort stoves that keep the oxygen out, and he's able to basically take that biological material, bring it down to a char while maintaining the mass and all of the nutrients that were in the material rather than them burning off. And that's the most dielectric substance known to man, far, far more dielectric than something like bismuth. And it has all kinds of wonderful qualities for agriculture and more. I've got people who've sent me examples of acorns that have petrified in as little as a year. They basically had a bucket filled with acorns that were alongside the house, and water was running off of the roof, rainwater, and filling the bucket. And within 1 year, they had turned to solid stone. I'll be showing some of my own research that has to do with petrified organs and specifically petrified hearts. A man who saw my videos and was, you know, just really taken by the subject, wrote me a beautiful letter talking about a dog of his that passed away. And he wanted to honor the dog, and the way that he decided to do that was to create a funeral pyre with some of the hottest burning wood known to man. I don't remember which kind of wood it was, but he this thing was, how much was it? It was 6 foot long, 4 foot or 8 foot long, 6 foot, 8 foot long, 6 foot. I can't remember the dimensions. It was a lot of wood. It burned for 36 hours. And at the end, he went to put out the embers with some water just to make sure it wasn't a fire hazard. And when he did, it removed the ash. He could see a distinct difference between the ash of the dog and the ash of the wood. And when he poured the water on it, it exposed a lump, and he picked up the lump, and it was the heart of the dog. It was the only thing that had survived 36 hours of burning. And he said it had hardened almost to stone. So that's totally in alignment with some of the things that I'll be showing you later. So there are, apart from the work that I've done and what I presented with my own finds, there are loads of articles from newspapers from 100 years ago, before the Rockefellers took over publishing, where they're talking about all kinds of exotic petrified finds, whether it was fruit or organs or you name it. There's loads of it in the old newspapers, but not in the new ones. And yeah, so let's see. I'll put myself back on screen there. Oh no, it's two of blocks too much. All right, I'll just leave myself out. So let's see here. This is a man named Girolamo Sagato. He was an Italian scientist who basically discovered how to petrify any kind of flesh. And there are museums that have his works in them to this day in Italy. Here you see on the right, petrified kidney, there's petrified heart, brains, you name it, he could petrify it. And isn't it interesting that they've got him here as a looking like Medusa with the snake hair. And there was another man named Paolo Guarini who could do the same, who was also Italian, and their secrets to petrification died with them. So it's just a fact that soft tissue can petrify. Geology doesn't acknowledge it, and there's lots of evidence for it. These are known as bog bodies, and this is interesting because this is probably found in the UK, but you have the peat bogs, which are highly acidic, and when bodies fall into them and stay there over time, the effects are really unusual, right? It dissolves the bone and it dissolves muscle, but it hardens the organs. So basically you get this skin fatty sac that's filled with a bunch of hardened organs. It's pretty gruesome, but it's in alignment with my theories about petrified organs also, because, a lot of people ask the question, well, where's the rest of the body? Well, what if this happened on a widespread basis? You would eventually have this skin sac would rupture and the hardened organs would exit. And maybe they wouldn't be fully stone, but maybe that process would be finished off by being buried in mud and they would become a form of mud fossil. So these are all things that I didn't know anything about until I started looking into these subjects. And, people sent me stuff along the way, and I had theories about what I was finding, but I couldn't explain the why of how it could come about. And then along the way, we find out about things like bog bodies and stuff like this, like how to make a ruby in a microwave. So 99% aluminum oxide, 1% chromium oxide. I think he throws a little bit of steel wool in there. He puts it inside of a crucible and puts it in the microwave for 10 seconds. And he's got it covered with a ceramic lid so the lid can kind of move around, and the plasma is working its way around the steel wool and these different powders. And you can see the raw ruby there. And when you hit it with the UV light, it fluoresces like a ruby should. So this is literally creating the second hardest stone we know of in a microwave, because the force of the magnetron and the plasma in a matter of seconds. And someone once asked me, well, if that was true, why can't you just make a lot of money selling rubies? And I'm guessing they're probably not of high enough quality to do that, but it's pretty interesting that it can be done at all. So I mentioned before that petrified wood, and you get this opalization of the silica infusing itself into the different layers of the wood, and that's what they call chatoyancy, which is basically that shiny quality where the different layers are catching light in different ways, and that's why it shimmers. Lots of examples of different kinds of stone around the world that look very biological, right? This on the lower right there, that looks like maybe the stomach lining of a whale or something. I mean, it's just how does this form, and is it possible that has a far more direct connection to biology than what we're taught? Because what we're taught is that those are going to take tens of millions of years and a whole lot of pressure to form stone that's that hard. Here's some examples of opalized wood, and you can see as she opens the one in the middle there's your silica infusion. The one on the right is petrified wood. That's stone now, but if you slice it with a diamond saw and polish it, you can still see all of the beauty of the micro layering of the original wood. And that's one of the more beautiful opals that I've ever seen. So we're not allowed to ask these kinds of questions, right? Thou shalt not question the Big Bang or Earth shape or the moon landings or gravity, any of this kind of stuff, and especially don't question anything has been decided to be settled science. And I think that's total bullshit. That's not how the scientific method works. And there's no such thing as settled science, because we can always be making new discoveries. So I suggest that we all be like Toto wasn't Dorothy that sussed out that the guy was a charlatan. It was actually Toto that sniffed it out and pulled the curtain back. And then she became aware that the whole thing was a ruse, right? So we don't need to be like Dorothy. We need to be like Toto and pull the curtain back every chance we get, which I know everyone in that room is probably doing. And, you know, a lot of it starts with this. I had suspected NASA had faked moon landings long before Alex Michael came into my life, but it never occurred to me that maybe they had been faking everything since. And I was a big Star Trek and Star Wars fan, and so it was a hard one for me to let go of. And it took about 3 solid months of investigation before I kind of like gave it up and you know, realized that I couldn't find proof of anything that I had been you know, taught and grown up believing. So that's a meme that I made on the right that I'm proud of. Shows just how bad it can get if you believe NASA, right? And so, you know, when you start to get into this subject of Earth shape, that leads to these old maps and a lot of the myths and the legends and Hyperborea and Shangri-La and the Garden of Eden. It starts to feel like, huh, maybe there could be some truth to that, especially when you get into the evidence in favor of the great trees, which we're going to go into in a bit. But on the right there, you see this depiction of the celestial spheres, the Russian doll model, that cosmic egg model that all of the civilizations around the world had until we got the Jesuits and the Vatican with the heliocentric model. This is the Norse mythology, the great tree, the world tree, Yggdrasil, at the center of creation, and the accretion disk and the dome. So I think that ultimately flat Earth is, you know, it's a divisive term. Obviously, it's a false dichotomy because they get everyone arguing about whether it's flat or a sphere, when the reality is probably way more complex, and that we're looking at something that's a mixture of both. And I think a lot of people are leaning more and more towards this toroidal model of our world. And you know, it's basically they disposed of the ether, they disposed of alchemy, and they gave us this mechanistic, atomistic, reductionistic science that divorces spirit and matter, and you know, is just diverging away from real science in favor of their theory tale. So then, you know, along the way comes mud floods and Tartary and star forts and orphan trains and world's fairs and all of these seemingly separate, you know, conspiracy rabbit holes that when you actually study them enough, they all dovetail beautifully, and it creates this very coherent tapestry of a past that has been completely hidden from us, that we have been taught is just the imaginings of primitive people. But we can see the traces of the creation of the people who came before all around the world, and they defy the mainstream narratives. You know, almost every building is just a complete defiance of what we were taught. Then comes this subject, the No Forest on Flat Earth, that came out, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. I saw that video and I thought it was interesting, and it was pretty compelling information. And a lot of these tabletop mountains do look like tree stumps, but it wasn't something that I was just 100% convinced of. I watched this video, Geology Revived by Wakey Wakey, which is great. And he was tugging at the threads of geology and really challenging some of the cornerstones of the geological narrative. That, combined with Roger Spur's idea of, you know, a more rapid petrification and mud fossils, got me thinking about geology in general and just looking at everything around me through new eyes. It was a pretty exciting time. It was like being a child again, because it's just like, okay, well, if they've lied to us about all of this stuff, then what is true, and how do you know what's true? And are we in a simulation? And ultimately, if it's a simulation, then things don't really matter so much. But I kind of have operated under the assumption for a long time that there's a physical reality that we all exist in, and you can rail against it and beat your head against the wall, but you're going to give yourself a concussion if you do. So that's very real, and you know, we experience the effects of that physical reality. But then it seems like there's this matrix overlay on top of that we're all experiencing mostly through our black mirrors and media. And so, you know, when you start to put these different puzzle pieces together and then look at the actual evidence that's out there, it just is utterly mind-blowing, because it starts to be self-evident that what you're seeing is not formed in the way that we were taught. So are these all trees? I don't know. I suspect they are. Obviously, the most famous of them is Devil's Tower, which you'll see in a second. But this is a real game changer here, because even if you buy the sedimentary model of geology, that this is all formed through things laying down over long periods of time, how can that happen and also form concentric rings at the same time? And that was a big penny drop for me, that doesn't work. This has the look of something biological that grew, as does this. And I made this video called Felling Titan Trees, because there were so many people that were arguing over porphyry phonolite, this columnar jointing that you see there, and what its makeup is, and how it was formed, and when it was formed. And so even among truthers, there's a lot of people that have, you know, turned their nose up at these topics and said that there's no substance to them. And I just want, and it begs the question, obviously, if these were trees, who cut them down? And I just wanted to show that even with steampunk technology, you could slice through massive quantities of stone with just something as simple as a diamond embedded rope and motors that are pulley driven. So you could totally take down something large with old technology. You don't need to invoke aliens or lasers or something along those lines. But then we do have these ancient myths of titans, right? We've got Paul Bunyan in North America, who was a lumberjack who cut down giant trees, and he had this massive ox that was his buddy. I always forget the name. I think it's Blue or something like Bo. Anyway, someone there maybe knows. And we have these myths of Medusa. Well, Perseus has to kill Medusa in order to grab the head, in order to get to the Kraken in time and turn it to stone in order to save Princess Andromeda. And I loved those stories as a kid, but it never occurred to me for a moment that maybe they were actually real. And that got into the subject of Titans. And Roger Spur was on about that with his 1,000-mile long dragon in the Sahara Desert that's battling a giant fish. And I thought, okay, this is really out there. But if it's not a spinning ball, we don't know how big it is. We don't know how far it extends. And, you know, okay, why not? Maybe it's possible. And then there seem to be all of these rock formations around the world that do look like faces or beings or a being lying on its back. But I suspect that a lot of this is actually paridolia. And so I was skeptical going in. Roger Spur with his dragon, and there's ancient myths that have to do with that are spoken of in Greek mythology about the Leviathan and the Behemoth, which is this great battle between these beings. And a lot of people were pressing Roger Spur about Earth shape, because he's totally a heliocentrist, and he's using all kinds of information from NASA to verify his claims about the planetary bodies and asteroids that are floating in space are actually body parts of ancient titans. So he's mixing models. He's got heliocentrism in there with the ancient myths of the titans, and I just he and I went round and round many times, and I just don't agree with a lot of what he has to say. But I'm trying to educate people about the subject of paridolia, because I think a lot of these are just, things look like faces and they catch the shadows just right. And then people want to claim unequivocally that they are giants or titans. And, if you look at a mountainscape and you turn your head to the side, you're probably going to see a face. And if you turn your head the other way, you might see another face, because the mountain looks different, But there are sites around the world, like this one on the right, that have these caves that are in the right space. It totally looks like the head and neck and shoulder of a giant humanoid. But what you don't find is any boots on the ground footage of these sites. I finally found an HD video of this, but it was still taken at a distance. So I've never seen anyone who's gotten up in those caves, because if you get up in the caves, there should be something that resembles anatomy on the inside as well. And that's kind of how my whole channel began. So I saw this video by Jay Dreamers called Petrified Titans. And in that video, he was synthesizing a lot of Roger Spur's work. He was talking about rapid petrification. And then he showed these sites, this one in Iceland on the left, which looked a hell of a lot like an elephant. And this one on the right is an island in Maui, and you can get on Google Earth and you can look at this thing and you can spin around and see it from 360 degrees. And it looks like an elephant from every direction. Is it an elephant? I don't know, but it got me questioning. And so I think, you know, we should all do that. We should keep an open mind, but not open it so far that our brains fall out. And, you know, if you do keep an open mind, what you find after you've looked into this stuff long enough is that all of these different subjects and a whole lot more, there seems to be some truth to all of them. But, you know, putting it all together coherently is the challenge. And a lot of people get hung up on their pet theory and everything becomes that. That was true with Roger Spur. He's claiming that all stone on Earth is mud fossils in one way or another. So my attitude with all of this is that the answer is probably E, all of the above, and we need to give each idea its day in the sun rather than just rejecting it if it doesn't fit with the model that we believe in. So mainstream tells us that petrification of giant creatures is impossible, or not just petrification, but the existence of those creatures, because they would have been so big that they would have collapsed under their own weight. Their bones wouldn't have been able to support them because of gravity. And the people in the room that you're sitting in, most of you probably are aware that what we were taught about gravity is not true either. But the mainstream story is that because of the square cube law, when you double the surface area, the volume scales exponentially. Right. So basically, a lot of people, when they find out that we see too far with our optics, you know, a lot of people want to default to, well, maybe the Earth is just bigger than what we were taught. But if that's true, then all of NASA's calculations for slingshotting around the moon and, you know, landing rovers on Mars and on asteroids, and all of those numbers go out the window if the Earth is substantially bigger than what we were taught, because it would have to have had a lot greater mass and therefore a lot greater gravity. But if you look into electrostatics and those sorts of things and buoyancy and density, you find that the strong force of gravity is weaker than the electrostatic force. The electrostatic force is 10 to the 36th power stronger than the supposed strong force of gravity. So we don't even need the mainstream gravity to explain what we see here anyway. It's just something that we have to deal with because that's what everyone's been taught to believe. So why is this important? You know, who are we? Where are we? What is the nature of physical reality? These are all important questions. You look at the budget of NASA and all of the other spacefaring agencies. These are very important questions, you know, because the default is, why does this matter? I still have to go to work on Monday, et cetera, et cetera. So coming from a scientific background, studying chiropractic, basically it's a medical degree. My first 3 years of school were akin to studying to be a medical doctor, studied the scientific method, how to read papers, how to understand statistics and all these sorts of things. But this is essentially the scientific method in a nutshell. And you make an observation, you think of interesting questions, which I did with a mountain here in the town that I live in Spain. You'll see it in a moment. It's called Montgo. And it looked a heck of a lot like a creature. And so I decided to investigate it and follow this pattern. Mentioned biogeology before. I didn't invent the term. It's a term that's actually the study of the interaction between the biosphere and the lithosphere, and they're discussing how things percolate upward from the biosphere and into the lithosphere, and it's a very little used term in science, and so I stole it because I thought this is the perfect placeholder for denoting that difference between what we were taught about how stone forms and some alternative theories. So a lot of the criticism that I've gotten along the way has fallen into these categories, paridolia being the most obvious of them, that just because something looks like something doesn't mean that it is something, right? You can see faces or animals in clouds. It doesn't mean that there's a cloud there. Apophenia is more or less the same thing. It's where you recognize a pattern that's not a real pattern. People would say that that's what I've done when it comes to the heartstones, that I'm just really good at cherry picking things when I'm out looking around and I find stuff that fits my harebrained theory. They would call that cherry picking and apophenia, and claim that I'm a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that I've learned a little bit about geology. I have no formal training in geology. I've never actually been interested in studying archaeology or geology because I thought they were really boring subjects. But I find it to be anything but that now. But Dunning-Kruger is thinking you know everything after you've learned a little bit. Then there's others like the doctrine of signatures, where things tend to look like things. You'll find flowers that look like animals, and there's this kind of reoccurring pattern. You could call it the morphogenic resonance, morphic resonance of Rupert Sheldrake, but there's this reoccurrence of pattern that exists throughout nature, and that's why we see these things rather than it maybe actually being what it appears to be. So looking at this, what does it appear to be? Well, it sure looks like a tree stump in every way, but they've got all kinds of reasons why it couldn't be. They tell us that structure was formed over 50 million years of time. And basically there's 4 main theories that are bandied about, but they're all basically the same. They're talking about the land being much, much higher 50 million years ago. Where all that earth came from and where it went to is a good question. But the basic idea is that lava came up through fissures, and then this was all covered in earth, and that there was this massive rapid cooling event, that whatever it was that caused the mammoths in Siberia to flash freeze, that kind of an event happened. And because there was such a rapid cooling, that lava had nowhere to go because it was surrounded by earth. And then it created this pressure, and that pressure is what caused that honeycomb pattern that we call porphyry phonolite or columnar jointing. So those are the mainstream narratives about how that formed. But there's a problem with that. When you look at lava, it never does that, ever. There are never any straight lines. You see it flow, you can see it cool, it's amorphous. Sometimes it looks like vitrified material, other times it's very porous, but that's lava. And then we get this kind of stuff all around the world. You've got Giant's Causeway in the UK. I don't know where this is, but this is a honeycomb pattern within a honeycomb pattern. That's interesting. Well, even if you bought that this can form through pressure and rapidly cooling lava, how do you explain this? How do you explain this diagonal slice? Right? If you try to explain that away with some kind of glacier activity, then why is this structure behind it untouched? Right? These are already things that should get us questioning that mainstream model, which is far too simplistic. And then you find other manifestations of it where it's curving in different ways. This one on the right is called Devil's Postpile. That's in California. I got to stand on top of that when I was a kid. These look small here, but these are like 4 foot in diameter, these little chunks that are at the bottom. And you just get all of these odd manifestations of this columnar jointing, but it gets even weirder because you can find stuff like this. And when I see this, I immediately reject any rapid cooling explanation, because this has a very biological look to it. It looks like some form of tissue. I have no idea what it was. Could be, yeah, someone said skin. Are we looking at skin cells here? You'll see some other stuff that looks very much like skin cells. Then you get this sort of thing. You've got the columnar jointing, but you have circular parts within the hexagonal. So how does that happen through just some magical rapid cooling event? Well, people who totally buy the mainstream model should already be questioning at this point based on the things that I just showed. But if that's not enough, then we have sites that look like this. And this is where I think the term biogeology applies. This one on the left is called White Pocket. It's in Arizona. You'll see some video footage of that in a moment. See all these different layering. Some people might want to say that that's an eye. I would say it's far more likely that you're looking at petrified wood here, and that just happens to look like an eye. And you see all of this micro layering that wood does. And even if you bought the mainstream model for this story on the left here, you've got to believe a whole bunch of things. You got to believe, first of all, that the Earth did something where everything was white for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, and then it did this thing where it all turned black, and then it went back to the white, and then it went to the back, and then it changed its mind, much more rapidly. But not only that, you have to buy the tectonic model of tectonic plates colliding and causing this to turn upward, because this is vertical, right? So it can't be from layering of dead plant and animal life. So you've got to buy a whole bunch of stuff to accept the mainstream model. Then we have these things called concretions. These can be something like 6 foot wide, and when they break open, they look very unusual. I don't know how they formed. Are these former seeds of giant trees? Is this some kind of like a bezoar from a titan or something? Who knows? But when you see this one to the right, here you get this almost like cellular structure that could be plant life or animal life. But look at the micro layering on this stone, and look at how it just follows and it curves up, and those layers go through these different. I can't even begin to imagine how this formed, but I don't think that it formed through the cycle of petrogenesis that we were taught. Now, some people might be thinking AI. Most of the pictures in my presentation I gathered 5 or more years ago. I've gathered a lot along the way, but long before we had the ability to fake all this stuff. And even so, we've got this HD footage of White Pocket. And what is this? I don't know. It looks like flesh. It looks like muscle. It looks like cellular structure. It looks like a lot of stuff, but what it doesn't look like is something that just formed by dead plant and animal life laying down. So all those questions were bouncing around in my head, and I put out a request to God to send me something that was just absolutely undeniable. I wanted to see a mud fossil, because Roger Spurr was constantly holding up rocks and making 100% certain claims about what it was and what the body part was, and here you can see the blood vessel, and here you can see the bone. And I've got a background in anatomy as a chiropractor, and I'd be looking at the stones going, maybe, but I'm not fully convinced, and definitely not enough to be 100% convinced. But he was, because he had apparently gotten 3 different DNA reports that were done that had all come back humanoid on different stones that he was examining. But anyway, 3 days after that request, I was out in a river bottom and I found this stone. And this completely blew my mind, because after a couple of minutes of looking at it, pretty quickly after I picked it up, I realized this looks like a heart. And the more I looked at it, the more it looked like a heart, because it had very specific features that were in the right places. And so just to give you an idea here, can you see my cursor as I move it around?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really fascinating, because you have the left atrium and the left ventricle in hearts, and then between them you have this indentation where the coronary artery runs. And so this stone has that indentation, and it also has an opening where the coronary artery would have come out and wrapped and gone right between the left atrium and the left ventricle. And alongside of that, which you'll see in a whole bunch of fleshy hearts shortly, is a fatty area, and that fat sits right there. So already I was looking at that, and that's 1, 2, 3 anatomical features. Here you have the openings of the pulmonary arteries. And you can see this is what the stone looks like. This is called an isthmus. It's shaped like an hourglass. And this is the isthmus in a heart. It's identical. How specific is that? And then also you can see that the stone itself is white. And everywhere that the white has worn away, it's fleshy red. If you can see how red it is here. And if I put this stone under water and wet it, it looks like meat. It looks like steak. So you can see that wherever the white wears away, it's red underneath. And then you have these openings. And I looked at the openings, and those openings normally would have valves. And those valves are opened and closed by these muscles that are known as the papillary muscles. And you got these bumps right here where those muscles would have been. And notice it's very bumpy, the structure inside. You'll see that in a second up close. If that was formed through some kind of water erosion, you would expect it to be smooth. And it was anything but smooth. It's bumpy, and you'll see why in a moment. So I got that rock home, and I pulled out my anatomy books from school, and I started looking at it. And by the time I was done, I had a list of about 15 anatomical features. That's a lot, right? If you have something that looks like a heart, that's one. If you have something that's got a couple of features, you've got this list. But the longer that list gets, the harder it should be to find a stone that meets that criteria, right? And to have something, I eventually got an endoscopic camera. I got in here with the camera. I've got footage of that on my channel. I had it CAT scanned. I've found other stones since then, because going back to the scientific model, if this is a real thing, I should be able to find more examples of it, right? That's the nature of it. It should be repeatable. It should be scalable, especially in the case of hearts, because we've got everything from rodents' hearts up to elephants and bigger. So you should find this scalability of it as well. I still couldn't explain at that point why I would find hearts outside the body. We'll get to that in a minute. So I came up with this, criteria of what to look for. But these are hearts, right? This one in the center is an elephant heart. And I was talking about the coronary sulcus and that fatty area. This is human here. You can see that that's right where the sulcus would go. And there's the fatty portion of the heart. And you can see it again here, and the sulcus, and there you can see the opening of the coronary artery. And you can't see that here, but you can see the coronary sulcus. This is giraffe. Notice the morphology. It's totally different. This is big and like a blob, and this is long and narrow, just like the giraffe's body, right? So we have pig heart, we have human heart. All of the hearts are different shapes and different sizes, but their overall morphology remains the same. And what you can't see here that you can here is that they're all surrounded in the pericardium. It's this thick fatty sac that surrounds all organs. They're all surrounded in fatty sacs. The heart is called the pericardium, and it's the thickest of all of the organs. So if there was one organ that was likely to survive the cataclysm, it would be the heart, because it's dense, it's a thick muscle, and it also has this thick fatty protective layer. The other thing that's interesting is most of the heart, we think of it as muscle, but it's actually a fascial matrix. And they've proven this because they're actually growing hearts in laboratories now. And I'll show you a video clip of this. And you can see this is ghostly white, and it's because the blood has been removed. The reason the blood is red is because of iron. There's iron in the hemoglobin. And when you remove the blood from the heart, you would think it would stay red because it's a muscle, right? But no, when the blood is removed, it is ghostly white, and you'll see the process of them introducing the blood. Let me show that now. Let me just pull that up here. Got a video. There it is.
I'm Dominique Cedapun with Miromatrix Medical. We are a early stage regenerative medicine company.
So they're basically, they're creating these organs in laboratories.
The cells need to stay alive. And so the beauty of perfusion decellularization is we start with all that architecture intact, and more importantly, that all the blood vessels, all the vasculature system is still intact. So when we introduce cells back into that organ, they will already have a natural...
Watch. Okay, it's very white. They open the clamp up to let the blood in. Watch what happens.
Supply and be able to be fed with, you know, oxygen and nutrients, and we don't have to worry about trying to establish that vasculature system. So
that's in a matter of seconds. So that's really far out, because I was totally confused, because a lot of the initial hearts that the heart stones that I was finding, they were bone white. And I went and broke them open and I sliced them open. And a lot of times they were red on the inside, but I couldn't figure out why they were white on the outside. And then it occurred to me, well, duh, the pericardium is probably why they're white. And you know, that was what I could see was happening in that very first stone. So I went out into the river bottom where I found the first stone. I'm like, let's see if I can find more. And I filmed that process. The first video I made on the subject was called Mud Fossils, the Heart of the Matter. That's when I thought these were mud fossils. I couldn't understand it, because if the body was buried in mud to the point where the heart would petrify, where would the rest of the body be? I didn't understand it, but I was going to reject the empirical finds that I was finding, because I could see that there was this very repeatable pattern that was in the stones that couldn't be explained through some kind of normal erosion, or you know, like a water erosion process, or the abrasion that would happen as they bounce around. I was finding them on mountaintops. I was finding them buried in mud, in river bottoms, not just there, but also seashores. This was early days where these are not so specific, but you can see the general pattern. Ian showed me a couple of stones that they found on the beach, and they look just like this. I think he's got them there to show you guys.
Handing them around, Mike. We just handing them around.
Yeah. So you can see here, this one's upside down, right? This is the fat part, and that should be pointed the other direction, right? Like to match these two. But this is what we're not taught in school, is that, can stones have an orientation? Because what we're told about this is that these are broken fragments of larger sedimentary structures that have broken off into smaller pieces, and then through river erosion or at the seashore, they're wearing, and the edges are curving, and that's why we're getting this shape. But it gets way, way, way more specific than that, as I'll show you in a moment, to the point where that explanation no longer makes any sense. But we're not taught that stones could have a top and a bottom and a front and a back and a top and a bottom, like very, very specific features. And so I started to catalog these, and you can see these are bigger ones. This one here is the biggest. This is in my office, and that's 1.5 feet long. And you can see there's the isthmus and the pulmonary arteries. And let me show you here. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. No, this is one that I found in the river bottom. You can see how red it is on the inside. And I just broke the thing open, and this is what it looks like on the inside. And it had a very interesting smell to it as well. And I really regret not bringing that one back, because that's one I should have definitely sent to a laboratory for testing. At that point, I thought I was going to be finding those in droves. That one was pretty special, that it had so much of the red material still preserved. Yeah, so I started to break them open. I made a video called Broken Hearts Tell Tales. Took him to a vet and had it CAT scanned, and you can see the chambers, but the material was so dense that that you weren't able to make out any internal anatomy. But this one here is really interesting, because you can see there's a straight line here that's broken off, and I have that stone here in my office, and where the bottom has been broken off, you can see when you look at the bottom that it's actually showing what would have been the ventricle chamber there. And I wouldn't have known that except that it was fractured. And here you can see inside with the endoscopic camera that it's this very bumpy material, right? That's not water erosion there. And if you look at the inside of a heart, you would think it would be smooth muscle, right? but it's not. It actually has what's known as trabecula carne, and that word trabecula will come back here in a moment, but you can see that it's very, very bumpy, and you can imagine if that were to petrify to stone, that it would probably look like what we're seeing inside the chambers there. Went over to Alex's, and we sliced some open with an angle grinder, and I used different varying degrees of sandpaper to polish them, and you can see the results of that. Let's see here. Oops. Right. Yeah, I don't think I pick it up in this video, but this is sliced, and it actually exposes one of the arteries going across the midline of the heart. And again, I theorized early on that anything that was fat would petrify to quartz. And the interesting thing is that this line in this stone is actually lined in quartz. So just show you, these are some of the better specimens. Set them, so I'm not the best of preppers. Anyway, this is a new one. So at the top, you're going to have the aorta and the vena cava, which are the two biggest blood vessels in the body, right here and here. And that can either be an opening that goes to a chamber, or it can be a crease. If the heart has been compressed at all, the opening would be like a slit instead, or it can be an indentation or even a discoloration. So what we're starting to get are kind of the cardinal signs here of a heartstone, which is there's basically 7 main ones, which is the harp shape, like the musical instrument, where it tapers in on the sides. And part of the tapering in has to do with the contraction that the heart goes into on death. You know, all of the muscles in the body contract. It's called rigor mortis. And so when that contraction occurs, and you'll see that in an animation in a moment, the sides taper in, the bottom twists, and at the top is where you have those openings for the aorta and the vena cava. You know the routine, right? And you can see the line. And then this line here is what is known as a sulcus line. That is highly specific, and I'll come back to that. There. But this is also a new one. Got this yesterday out at sunset for a little less than an hour. Got about a half a dozen of them. But this one, look at this. These are twin flames here. This one is new. Sulcus line, indentation, tapered. Another sulcus line. Same exact rock. Even down to the sulcus line. And that one is pink, and when you put it underwater, it looks like flesh. It's a beauty. Indentation at the top for the blood vessels. Those openings or indentations or slits are never found on the bottom of these stones. Once you know what the orientation is, you start to be able to see these everywhere. And a lot of people think they know the anatomy, and they start sending me basically pictures of rocks that look like blobs that don't have a lot of specificity. And so that's why I started making these videos to teach people how to spot this. And this is a big one. When it's wet, it just looks almost bloody. Same with this, missing a chunk. And here you can see the break. It's immediately apparent that there's a flaw in the stone. Like that one that was CAT scan that I show. It's like a cleavage that these stones don't normally exhibit. They're whole in and of themselves, and oftentimes they have that white outer layer on the inside, darker red. So yeah, every once in a while I got to go out and get a little inspiration. And there you can get to see there for this. You can see that blood vessel going across, and it's lined in quartz for this stuff. But it's very repeatable. And there as well, you got the blood vessels on top, you have the harp shape, the tapering in, and that one really, you can see it, the flesh is kind of peeking out through it. I haven't sliced that one open, but I'm suspecting I'll be able to see some anatomy in that one. Predictable and bizarre. So I created the Wilkerson scale, which is just the basically anatomy of a heart and the different things to look for. And that's a long list. That one stone from the beginning is up to 24 different anatomic features. That's a lot of features. So when you start to get into specificity, then you can start to rule out paridolia. And then that begs the question, why hearts outside the bodies? And eventually I came up with what I call boiled egg theory. I was thinking of eggs and how they start with a hard outer shell, but they're liquid inside. And when you cook them, after just 12 minutes, it looks like this, right? The proteins denature and start to harden. Well, the pericardium, if you were to cook an egg with a lot more heat and a lot longer, it's just going to crack, and the egg is going to leak out of the shell. But with the pericardium, the thing is designed to be flexible and move as the heart is contracting and relaxing. So that could protect the heart. It could go into rigor mortis and then eventually harden. So the working theory is that all things that are fat are petrifying to quartz. That would be fascia, pleura, the eyes, the sclera of the eyes. You'll see that later on. And even blood plasma, because if you look at blood composition, 55% is plasma. If you centrifuge the blood and you get the red blood cells out, what remains is mostly water. And if you remove all of that water, you get what's called human serum albumin in the case of humans. And that's what you're looking at here. This is that with the water removed, and it's basically like quartz crystal flakes. So what happens to the bones? I talked about the peat bog and the bog bodies. Well, this is what happens when you put bones into a crock pot. After just some hours, they soften to sponge, and then eventually to like a gel, and then eventually you have bone broth. So there is a potential explanation for how the bones and the muscle could be absent and the organs could be hardened. So that ties into the work of a man named Francisco Torrent Guasp, who I didn't know about until I had already started making videos about the mountain. And someone, when I started with the Heartstone videos, someone commented in one of the videos that the heart is a rope. And I thought, okay, I don't know what that means. Yeah, the heart is a rope. Someone else commented the helical heart. And I said, I've never heard of that. So I looked up the helical heart on YouTube, and I found a documentary about this man's life. He's a cardiologist from Spain, of all places. He was going to school in Salamanca to become a cardiologist. And he had theories about the nature of the circulatory system, that the heart, it just doesn't make any sense that the heart is pumping blood out to all of our cells, and then it's just returning passively. How does that happen? There's a pump that pushes it out, but there's no pump to push it back. They talk about the valves in the veins holding the blood so that there's no backflow, and that we contract our legs and our arm muscles, and that's contributing to this returning of the blood to the heart. But that doesn't make any sense for a paraplegic who's not contracting anything in their legs. So how does the blood return? And he just rejected the whole circulatory model, and his colleagues thought he was crazy, and he was trying to get them to think about it differently. And for basically 25 years, he was struggling to get his discoveries acknowledged. And this is just a 1-minute video kind of summarizing his discoveries, which are monumental, changes everything we know about the structure, the nature of the heart, and how how the heart functions. So check this out.
Did you know that almost everything you were taught about
and
the
just
heart...
back before we start, watch this animation here of the heart.
Did you know that almost
and see the twisting
everything you were
as it contracts?
taught about the
So the heart fibers are actually spiraling. And so what I discovered in these stones after learning about this man's work is that I ran to my collection and I started looking at them from the bottom, and a lot of the best ones that I had this propeller-like twist at the bottom. And it was just utterly mind-blowing, because it was a feature of the hearts that I didn't know about. And also this line here, this is known as the sulcus line. And that line is where the folds of the heart meet, and you're going to see that in a moment. Everybody's still there? I've been talking for a long time. I haven't heard anything.
Oh, good.
All right. Okay. So check this out. This is the just a little summary of the life of Francisco Torrent Guasp.
Heart is wrong. Most everyone. Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation. Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972 after dissecting.
So what he did here is he boiled the heart, and then he carefully removed the fatty outer layer with a scalpel without damaging the heart muscle at all. And because the heart has been boiled, he's able, using just his thumbs, to bluntly dissect and pull apart at the fibers.
Dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp finally discovered the heart's true structure. The heart's far more.
One other thing here in the heart stones. So this is the back side, and you can see there's a line going here and here. And then the front side has that other sulcus, the long sulcus line that goes down through the center of the heart. I have stones that have both the front line and the lines on the back.
The heart's far more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in 2 spiraling vortexes. This has been proven with CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic.
So here what they've done is they've blown up a cow's heart with gas, and then they're CAT scanning it as it expands and as it contracts. And what's mind-blowing about this is that the fibers of the heart itself are spiraling in 2 opposite directions. The muscle fibers are vortexing. The fluid itself is vortexing in 2 opposite directions. The heart has the largest and most powerful electromagnetic field of the body. It's something like 6 times more powerful than the brain. And then this is positronic emission, and they're showing, it's like a Doppler thing, and they're showing with this, radiation that there's 2 different spirals in the flow of the blood through the heart.
CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction. It changes everything we know about the heart and
See the
circulation.
heart fibers?
If you'd like to know
spiraling
more,
in
check out
opposite
these
directions.
videos.
So this was utterly mind-blowing for me, because as a chiropractor, I knew the heart anatomy really well, having gone through chiropractic college, and I had never heard anything about this. I've talked to cardiologists that have never even heard of this man, and his theories were completely proven over 25 years ago, and they still haven't been, disseminated into our school textbooks. Everyone's still learning the pump model of how the heart functions, and it's completely wrong. And I mentioned that when the heart contracts, you can see the spiral fibers here. It starts to look like a propeller blade when it's in full contraction. And a lot of the stones that I have look exactly like this from the bottom. And there's your front sulcus line, and then the backs. So I made a video about this called Helical Hearts, Petrified Organs, and Synchronicities. And one of the biggest synchronicities of all was that this man worked, and he lived and worked out of his home through his entire career. And his home was on the foothills of Montgo. Here in, it's Denia is the next town over, which is where his house was. And it's just utterly mind-blowing that his his place of work and where he made this discovery was on the mountain that I had been making videos about. So what makes these finds compelling? They're empirical. It's not a theory. They're physical finds. They're very specific. Histological specificity. Histology is the study of tissue. It's repeating pattern. It's scalable. It's even predictable. I found stones that were half buried, and I could tell which part of the stone I was looking at, and I predicted what the other side of the stone was going to look like. And then I pulled it out of the earth, and sure enough, it looked like that. So there's a logical consistency. Like if you think of the odds of things when it comes to like a royal flush in poker, the odds are very slim that you're going to get those. Well, the odds are impossible that you're going to get a royal flush 5 times in a row. But if I start finding stones that have a high degree of specificity, and I can find a bunch of them in a short amount of time that match heart anatomy, then we're looking at a very repeatable, specific pattern. And that has proven to be true, as people around the world have sent me photographs of stones that they've found that are sometimes far more heart-looking than some of the stuff that I was finding here. And you can just see all of the different ways that it manifests, everything from the white all the way to this dark, fleshy red. You can see the fatty, even the crystallization of the pericardium. It's just a whole lot of specificity that doesn't make any sense unless there's a there. So people who are already familiar with my work, I'm sure, are familiar with this mountain. It's called Montgo. Alex lives very close to it, as do I. And I always loved it because it looked like an elephant, but it never for a moment occurred to me that, it might actually be some great creature. But after seeing all these videos I got on Google Earth, I started taking a look at it. And I was blown away by what I found, because you could see that there was a head shape, and there was curves on both sides where the head would meet the shoulders. You could make out what appeared to be a rib cage and a spine, and the legs pointing back. So this looks to be a creature that's lying on its head with the head tilted back. And there's even a deep canyon, which I've hiked up many times, right through here, right between where the legs would be. So already, just after about an hour on Google Earth, I had a list of like 10 different anatomical features, which is already a lot. Plus this eye, which really caught my eye. Not just because it's shaped like an eye socket. It doesn't just look like an opening. You've got this eyebrow ridge. Right now, elephants don't have eyebrows, but they have a much more prominent ridge right here, and you're going to see an elephant skull in a moment. But what else they have is what's known as the infraorbital foramen, which is an opening that you can see clearly here on Google Earth, and we have that as well, and I'll show that in more detail in a moment. But again, you've got. And so here it's looking slightly to the right. There's a curve here and a curve here where the head would meet the shoulders. This whole section of the mountain has collapsed. I get a lot of people asking me, well, where's the left eye and the left ear? Well, can't be there because the whole mountain is collapsed, and all of this is just fragmented limestone, which is also very interesting, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if you're having a hard time seeing it, someone sent me this recently. AI is good for some stuff, but this is kind of what a lot of the locals see, because it's known affectionately as the elephant, and maybe not so far-fetched after all. So again, I got out my anatomy books, revisiting the scientific method. I'm like, I'm not going to jump off the deep end with this and just start calling it elephant. I'm going to do my research and look into it. So the thing that I had remembered from school is that the eye socket is actually very complex. It's made of 7 different bones that all have meeting points. And those meeting points are the same term that's used in the folds of the heart when the heart comes together. They're called sutures. These are suture lines. This is the frontal bone, this is the maxilla, and it has a meeting place right there where the colors change. And then you have these larger openings, which are fissures. That's where the optic nerve goes. And then this section here goes down and back into the sinuses. This is human skull. You can see it here. And elephants have the same thing, but it's a different morphology because of the shape of their skull. And their nasal passage is higher up, and it's very big. And they used to be confused with the cyclops. People would find these skulls and think it was a big one-eyed creature, and they didn't realize that the eye socket is actually here, and that this is actually the breathing passage. Well, that whole section there is where the mountain would have collapsed. Well, which part of the skull would have been weakest? Probably where there's a giant hole in it. So that whole left side would collapse. That would take the eye with it and the ear as well. But here you can see the suture lines. And in fact, this line here that's very prominent, there's a line exactly there on the mountain. This hole, which is known as the infraorbital foramen, which we have here directly below the eye, is more forward on an elephant skull. And if the head were to be tilted back, then that would find itself in front of the eye socket, which is exactly where you find it. This whole section is broken away, and this is the temporal fossa where one of the big chewing muscles comes down and connects to the mandibula for chewing. So that's really trippy, and that's a lot of specificity. Here, there's this fissure and this opening, and that's what you're seeing here, and it goes down into the sinuses. I didn't even know until I'd started making videos about this mountain, but in this cave, there's a section going down at just that angle, and it goes back into a deeper cave that a friend told me about. I didn't even know about it. And we went up there and we spelunked into this cave, and you'll see some footage of it in a moment. But here's me getting online, looking at the 3D anatomy, looking at where the meeting points are of the different bones. And you can see here this section where that hole is, right? But it's not just a hole, it's a hole that goes all the way through. And here we're looking through it now. So this has a very biological look to it. It doesn't look like anything that was formed through millions of years of layering. This is the Google Earth image, and you're seeing right through here when you look through this. So it's, it gets into this, what are the odds? Well, the odds get really slim when the specificity gets even higher. So if you look in the eye socket and you have the maxilla here and the frontal bone of the elephant skull, that suture line goes like this, and it jogs and it comes. It's like a little zigzag it does. This is that exact same portion in the cave. It's not a crack. It's literally two different overlapping parts of stone. And it's even doing that jog that we see here in this line. There's a cresting feature that sticks upward. And I hypothesized early on that this was the remains of the eyeball. And that was, that turned out to be even more far out than I thought. This is the optic fissure where the optic nerve goes in the elephant skull. And this is that exact same spot within the cave. So after a while, it started to feel like either we're in a matrix that's like a simulation, and it's the Twilight Zone, and reality is messing with me, or this is real. So there's this section of the cave here, or of the mountain, that's just behind the eye. The eye would be to the right of the screen. You'll see it in a second on Google Earth. But this is all red, and everything else is gray. So this is all limestone, but this section that's like a quarter moon is exactly where an ear would have attached. And it's not there now, obviously. And everywhere that the limestone is broken away, it's red underneath. A lot of the limestone around this mountain, when you break it up, it's got channels inside of it that are filled with red earth and iron ore, and quartz crystal is prevalent all over the island. I mean, all over the mountain. And so I thought, okay, well, what if there's a cave up here? And it turns out, and I didn't know it until I went looking on Google Earth, and then I tried to find the name of the road and discovered that these guys, Fundació Cirne, had actually gone in and excavated this cave that I didn't even know existed until I started looking for it. And what they found absolutely blew my mind. It was the most thoroughly excavated cave in all of Europe. They went in with LiDAR. They went in with 3D photography. They scanned in 3D the entire inner portion of the cave, and it has a very ear canal look to it, as you're going to see here in a second. So this is actually drone footage that Alex filmed years ago. And here's them going into that hole. There's their LiDAR. And here's a guy going around a corner. And if you look at the anatomy, like a cross section of the cochlea, it looks exactly like this. This looks like the petrified hair follicles of a cochlea, and he's going through a curved passage. They found dead bodies. There were cave paintings. Here's their fly-through. If you have red and blue glasses, you can see that in 3D. And this is where it gets really trippy. There's all these cave paintings. Here you've got, whoops. Yeah, you've got what looks to be a four-legged creature with horns. You've got creatures falling from the sky. Another four-legged creature with horns. And here you have what, to me, I interpret this as deluge, like the sky opened up and fell. And this is the broken fragments of the limestone. This is that collapsed section of the mountain. Now, the interesting thing about that too is that geologists did a survey of this whole mountain, and the whole thing is a national park. And they've got this like 20-page survey, and they've got pictures of that section of the mountain where it's collapsed, and it's called the synclinal. And even in mainstream geology, they claim that that whole section of the mountain has collapsed, and it's what's giving this curved layering to the strata. Yeah, so I started over there. Yeah, just showing that limestone at the end. So if that didn't convince you, this is pretty mind-blowing as well. This is what an eyeball looks like when it's pulled out. You can see how chunky and fatty this back portion of the eye is, and the optic nerve itself is almost entirely fat, right? And that would be anchored in the eye, and then you'd have muscles attached to the sides of that to move the eyeball around. So if this were an eyeball, the remains of it, obviously whatever petrified this thing, I'm guessing the plasma apocalypse, or some referred to it as the Phoenix event, or the Medusa event, or the electromagnetic plasma changeover event. There are lots of different names for when the shit hit the fan and it involved large amounts of plasma and electricity. If that were to happen, it's pretty easy to imagine the eyeball bursting and blowing out, but the backside would have been anchored into the skull. And so I went up there with some friends, Andreas Exertus, a YouTuber, and Victor Bouguet, who were visiting, and I took them up there to show them what I'd already discovered. And one of them noticed that the whole backside of this entire structure was covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz. So the sclera of the eye is fat. The whole backside of this cresting wave-like structure that sticks up is all covered in this 10-inch thick layer of quartz. And then there are all these channels going in. You can see them here, there's bigger ones. And those channels bifurcate also, which is very interesting because that also can't be explained by water erosion. So after making the first 4 videos, I was in an interview with Rodrigo Ferrari Nunes, PhD in anthropology, who was very curious about my work. And I went onto Google Earth to show him what I had already been looking at hundreds of times. And the eye had been blurred out, and so had the ear. You could see it almost looks like it was done by hand. And it's done in the weirdest way, where if you zoom in real close, it'll slowly open up. And if you zoom out, it closes up again. So now when people look at this mountain on Google Earth from a distance, you can see the before and after here, because I was using Google Earth as a drone, because you're not allowed to fly drones because it's a national park. You can see that quarter moon of the ear shape there. I had all this footage from different angles, and then I'm in this interview, and this is what the mountain looks like now to this day. And a lot of people who were on the fence and weren't convinced about what I'd been presenting saw that, and they're like, all right, that's it. If they're censoring the mountain, which it appears that that's what's happened, they could explain it through some kind of a computerized rendering glitch probably. But if they're doing that, then clearly they want to hide something. So then I started really getting deep into this with the structure of the limestone and the different rock formations that I was finding around on and around Montgo. And what the mainstream story is about limestone, interestingly enough, is that it's sedimentary rock composed mainly of skeletal fragments of marine organisms such as coral, forams, mollusk, exoskeleton. These are all made of calcium carbonate, which they're claiming over hundreds of millions of years has compressed into this form of limestone that's known as karst, is the type of limestone that's here on Montgo. And if you look at bone and you look at it under a microscope, you've got two different kinds of bone. You have cortical bone and you have trabecular bone. And the trabecular bone looks like Swiss cheese, and it's fractal. And it's like, if you look at it under a microscope, you can see that here it looks like Swiss cheese, and even under a microscope, it looks like Swiss cheese. This is where our red blood is formed. The stem cells are in here. You've got your, white blood cells. And you can see that it's still red here, even though the blood has been removed. So the cortical bone is this thick, compact part that gives the strength to the bone. And it has very little in the way of channels going in. And usually the ones that are going in, like you see here, are going to be bigger. Whereas the fractal nature of the trabecular bone, it goes all the way down to this microscope. So this is what the stones all around the mountain look like. You can see here the fractal going in. You can see the quartz. You can see that the earth itself is red like blood. And then there's all kinds of quartz crystal that is found oftentimes lining the channels of the openings. And the real deal breaker for the mainstream model is this bifurcation, where it splits off into smaller and smaller passages. And oftentimes those are at like 90-degree angles. There's no way water can do that. And if you look at this, you can see that it looks very biological. What's also interesting about this is there's no forum, mollusk, coral, or exoskeletal fragments found in any of the limestone on Montgo. Isn't that interesting? Even with a microscope, I took a 1000x microscope to this limestone all over Montgo, and there's no hint of any embedded skeletal or coral remains whatsoever. There is a kind of limestone that does have that makeup, and it's the same limestone that was used to build Coral Castle in Florida. And that limestone, you can see with the naked eye bits of shell and skeletal remains. So some limestone is formed that way. This limestone is definitely not. We also have this thick, blocky layering of limestone, which would line up with your cortical bone. And here you can see a big chunk of it. And I talked about you don't get all the small openings, but you get some big ones. And this particular piece, this chunk has broken away. You can see it's fallen on the ground here. And you can see that there are channels. And what's coming out of those channels? It's like red earth is just oozing out of these channels. So, and then what's embedded to the side of it? You have iron ore all over the island. Or island, I keep going. Ibiza's off the coast, so there's an island nearby. But here you can see the embedded iron ore. You've got these channels going in where they bifurcate, and then you have the quartz crystal. So we talked about that before, the human serum albumin. This is what it looks like. It's salmon and almond and all of these yellow oils Well, you remove the water from that and you petrify it and you get quartz. And yeah, so I made a 6-part series called Unveiling a Titan, where I go through all of the coincidences. And the question is, how long does that list need to get before you start to question the mainstream narrative and start to ponder, what if Titans really existed? That animal would have been 3 miles long and 1 mile tall, which is interesting because in the book of Enoch, which was removed from the Bible, they talk about the Titans. They say that God sent the angels to go to work at the great trees to cut them down in order to make it so that the Titans would not be able to flee the great flood by climbing the trees. So according to the Bible, or not the Bible, but the book of Jasher, the book of Enoch, it was actually God that ordered the trees to be taken down in order to make sure that the corrupted beings, which the flood was supposed to purge, wouldn't be able to escape by climbing the trees. So how long would that list have to be? 20 is already a massive number. 25, try over 50 different anatomical and histological features, from the microscopic to the macroscopic to the anatomic, all just matching anatomy and histology. So is that paridolia? Usually when they're looking at things, these mountainscapes that I showed you in the beginning, people are showing photographs from one angle. They're not accounting for shadows and foliage. Some of the stuff is clearly AI. Now AI is so sophisticated, a lot of people can't tell the difference. And they're just pointing at things and claiming that because it looks like a face, it is a face. There's no on-site investigations. There's no spelunking of caves. There's no deep, in-depth anatomical or histological analysis comparing it to the anatomy books. So, this is pretty in-depth, the analysis, CAT scans, microscopy, endoscopy, all of that. And then that gets to this question. A lot of times people get to that pretty quick. Same thing with flat Earth. Obviously, they're hiding our history. They're hiding, the fact that we live in a created realm. We don't necessarily, anyone who tells you 100% that they know what it is, I'm skeptical of. I suspect it's probably a toroid and that we're on the accretion disk, but you can't get outside of it to verify. And all of the stuff that they claim has been taken outside is all BS. So why the lie? Well, there's the money aspect of it, all the fakery of space and the trillions of dollars that have gone into that. But what about geology itself? Well, what we find is that all of the precious metals, that they're not all, but many of them, like gold and silver, copper, they mine for them in quartz seams. So the quartz would be your tree sap. And then the monatomics that are in our blood, we have gold, we have silver, we have everything inside of us in trace amounts. Those would be your electrolytes, right, of the blood. Well, the trees are going to have the same in the form of their sap. The sap petrifies the quartz. They go into the quartz seams to mine for your gold and your silver. And maybe there are outer realms. We don't know how big this place is. There's lots of questions about all that. But what we do know is that there used to be petrified forests all over the place. And those trees were filled with precious metals, and they were mined for those metals. And there are loads of articles from 100 years ago, before the Rockefellers took over publishing. My friend Ben from the channel The Archivist, Waking Up with Analog, he's cataloged those articles for over a decade and presented thousands and thousands of them on his YouTube channel. And some of these he sent me. Here you've got them mining the petrified logs, and they were assaying $15,000 of silver to the ton. That's $600,000 of silver per ton from petrified trees over 100 years ago. Here they're getting gold. Here they're talking about $1,000 to the ton. So this is just fact, but They've wiped it. They've wiped the history books. They've given us false history. And here you've got a petrified cedar tree with a diameter of 40 feet at the butt, and it was 700 feet long. More gold. So now we get into the work of Hangman 1128, who that's the name of his channel. I came across his work after I'd made some videos about the mountain, and it was utterly mind-blowing and brought tears to my eyes because he was on the ground, boots on the ground footage, high definition of the Black Hills of South Dakota, of Colorado, and he was showing unequivocally that the trees did exist and they're still here, but we have all been taught these bullshit narratives about geology, and so we are blinded to the very obvious fact that is right in front of our eyes. And here you can see when the limestone layer is removed that it's still got the grain. So when we're looking at this stuff, yeah. Oh, I thought someone said Mike. I'll show some more footage of these sites. These are not as clear, but a lot of these places, you go to the north side where the sun isn't always hitting, and it's still got the color of the wood. Like here, he's in videos, he's pulled away chunks of it, and you could see that it was still fibrous on the inside. And this is one of my favorite sites. I've seen this in person. I went and traveled with him for a week. He took me to the Black Hills of North Dakota, and we went to the Garden of Gods. And it's just undeniable when you see it with your own eyes that what you're looking at is tree in every way, shape, and form. So I've asked the question, what are geodes really? We've got tree sap that petrifies to quartz, fruits, seeds, nuts, fungus. All of this can potentially petrify. When you look at a cross-section of the gallstones and the kidney stones and the bezoars, they look identical to geodes. So there's an infinite variety of outcomes, right? It depends on what you start with, what the conditions are, if it's acidic, if it's alkaline, how much decay was present before it started to be petrified, what it was petrified by. Was it mud? Was it volcanic ash? Was it an electrical phenomenon? Was there fungus present, or bacteria or larvae? Had they already started to eat away at the wood before the petrification occurred? All of these are factors that are going to influence and affect the final product. So it's anything but settled science. It's just something that really, it's in its infancy. Biogeology wouldn't need to be called biogeology if geology was giving us the true story about things. I coined the term paradigm blindness. I think this is the main reason why geologists are blind to this. They're not anatomists. They're not studying medicine. They're studying rocks and geology. So why would they recognize these features? If they were to see the features, they would just dismiss it as paridolia because they're aware of paridolia. I think a lot of them are suffering from another term I coined, expertitis, the inflammation of being an expert. Academia itself is compartmentalized, where one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. It's a need to know basis, especially when you get into the government, where you've got the hierarchy of your military industrial complex, of your government, of academia, of the different secret societies as well. There's tons of compartmentalization. People become experts. They say that being an expert is knowing more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about nothing. And I think that's true for a lot of PhDs. And as I said before, geologists are not anatomists. And if they're intentionally obfuscating things, why? There's the financial gain. There's the fact that geology supports heliocentrism in space when it comes to the timelines. They loop back on each other. If one fails, the other fails. And we live in a created realm that might only be thousands of years old rather than billions. And they seem to want us to believe a bunch of lies for some reason. Loads of other sites. I'm going to breeze through the last of this stuff. I've been going for a while now. I'll open it up to questions in a moment, but These are the salt mines of Romania and Poland, which again, we're just told that this is a natural layering that occurs over long periods of time. And what you see is that all the micro grain, you even see these concentric rings, like I showed in the very beginning with Jugurtha, that plateau mountain that had the vertically or horizontally, it had these concentric rings. So I reject the layering notion of the petrogenesis cycle when I see this sort of thing, because it doesn't make any sense that something like this could be formed by dead plant and animal life laying down over long periods of time, or getting these beautiful grain layers where it's like, okay, the earth would have had to do this and then that and then this and then that and just keep going back and forth. It doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that that's biology, and that we're looking at tree grain or perhaps even muscle fiber in the case of titans. But here you can get a sense of how amazing these locations are, and look at that. And here,
Yeah, that's great.
makes a lot more sense that we're looking at tree knots and tree grain. And there's possibility this could be AI, this image, but what you're going to see next is definitely not. And to me, this one little video clip is already a deal breaker for the petrogenesis cycle, because you can't explain this in that fashion. But what you can explain it with, very simply, along with all the sites that I saw with Hangman, is that what we're looking at here is petrified wood that is now sandstone and is actually breaking down to sand. And look at that beautiful, the tree grain there. Then you get this sort of thing. This is known as banded iron. Again, you got to buy that story that the earth is just switching up all the time. And then this incredibly brittle material, it's never broken as it's swirling, and they explain that with heat. A lot of people are looking at the whole meltology thing now, and they're claiming that these are melted buildings. And yeah, this looks like it was once buildings, and there was some kind of an X factor event that melted this. But they're also calling Jordan, Petra in Jordan, melted building. And I've looked at that on Google Earth, and I've looked at loads of footage up close, lots of great images that show this sort of stuff on the insides of these structures. And here you can see that complexity of the layering of the wood grain, and all the color is still there because it hasn't been bleached out by the sunlight. You can see even the roof here. This white portion is broken away, and look at all the detailed grain under that white portion. To call this melted brick and to claim that it's getting that layering because of the mortar and the layering between the bricks, I think you have to have a melted brain to jump to that conclusion. I rejected meltology outright in the beginning, and then eventually I started to see enough sites and locations around the world where there does seem to be a lot of evidence of melt and even vitrification, where brick is literally dripping. But when you see these sites here, to explain this as melted building requires a melted brain. This is all in the Black Hills of North Dakota, and you can see the micro layering of the grain. But each one of these pieces you're looking at that might be 50 or 100 feet wide was a tiny chunk inside of trees that reached into the heavens and were very likely miles wide at the base. And you can see that's a 4-foot chunk of sap right there. You can see the sap seams. This is where they're going to find the precious stuff. They would just tear through this, and then they would crunch it up and use acid and different things to separate out the materials. Sap can come in any color. It can be red, it can be green, it can be blue. That's a dragon tree. Here there's sap where they say the tree is bleeding metal and that it is absorbing the metal from the ground. I would suggest no, that the tree itself is biologically transmuting things that are in the earth, and it is creating the metals. And then when the tree gets hit, those metals, those monatomics, are aligning themselves along the lines of current, which would explain why they find gold and silver in veins. Funny how they're using anatomical terminology, right? Here we've got green sap. And then you got this phenomenon as well. These are all data points, right? Each one of these, the tabletop mountains, the sap, the layering, these different sites, the fact that we've got trees that gush like waterfalls because they're tapped into the water below, and that water's coming up through channels. But we've got people like the Action Adventure twins going into these deepest caves in the entire world. They're going down 500-600 feet, walking through a snaking channel and going down another 500 or 600 feet. We've got stuff like this where they're hitting trees with machetes like animals, and it's gushing out like a fire hydrant from a tree. So now if that tree was miles wide and you were to cut a bunch of them down, how much water were they containing? How much water would be freed? Could that potentially explain a worldwide flood where the ocean levels would rise by 400 feet? Probably. And here you can see all these different, what they call collateral root structures. Some claim that there was a geological survey done with LIDAR that exposed root structures below the tower. I've never been able to find the study. I don't know if it's just BS. But interesting that that we have places around the world. The deepest are in North America, where they're spelunking down these caves. And again, you got that horizontal layering that they would tell us is sedimentary layering. Okay, so if you bought that, how do you explain the channel? How do you explain that if this channel was created by water erosion, all of this stuff is chunky and not eroded?
It's
When
certainly a crazy thing, Mike. Certainly a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Mike, I want to open up to some questions in a sec. So I don't know.
Yep, I'm almost done here. Let's see. I've just got like four more slides. So right. So we've got the Action Adventure twins. This is a lava tube here. And lava tubes are another data point that's very funky when it comes to this biogeology thing, because here we've got horizontal lines and here we've got vertical. So how does that, they're saying that these are formed by lava being pushed through fissures and it's creating these tunnels. But how does that bifurcate? That doesn't make any sense, that it's just the lava is just going to start going in two different directions and form these openings in the channel. So that's just another data point in favor of the theory, as is this. We've got the tipuis, which are these tall tabletop structures, like in Venezuela, the tallest one. That it's got Angel Falls, which is the tallest waterfall in the world. Can't be explained through rainfall. There's no way rain is creating that water. It's coming up through channels from deep in the earth, thousands of feet above the ground, and then just a perpetual waterfall coming down. And isn't it interesting that they call them artesian wells, like arteries? So again, they're using anatomic language when they're describing geology. So again, we want to keep our minds open. We don't want to reject things. I had to eat crow when it came to the meltology people, and I've owned up to that in a live stream that there are some sites that definitely appear to be melted buildings, but I think they're dramatically over applying their theory to the point where they make truthers look like idiots. And that's what happens when you try and over apply a theory to everything, is you start to look really stupid to people who can actually use logic. So those are some of my videos. Reality, can you hack it? Dave Weiss, the rabbit hole is deep on this one, but he realized it was a root tunnel. So, and this is my recently published book, came out in September. Done very little to promote it, but it is a great read and it's a lot of fun, and it tells the tale of my misadventures as a hacker in the 80s when I got caught in 85 and I had infiltrated Microsoft and Boeing and some other companies, and ended up going to jail for it. So don't do that. Learn from my mistakes. And thank you all for listening.
Wow.
That's
Michael
it.
Wilkerson, ladies and gentlemen. Well, Mike, that was thorough, man. That was a good one. Thank you. Michael, a couple of questions come through. So, firstly, question, paridolia. I'm sort of more inclined to not believe paridolia with the massive amounts of evidence that you see. And there are many, many rock faces that look like people and titans and everything else. I'm more inclined to believe they are more titans than paridolia these days, which is a change that I didn't have. I always thought it was paridolia, but there's too much evidence. The elephant rock, which I've seen, and I know you did the thing with, is unmistakable biologically. It cannot be anything else but a giant elephant. So these things definitely exist. These petrified giant things definitely existed. I just want to touch a little bit on the biblical thing, Mike. There's a verse
Can I
in
just play
Isaiah
devil's
that
advocate
says-
real quick before you go to the Bible?
Say again?
Because, you know, like I just want to play devil's advocate on that one, because like
Sure.
the place in Iceland that looks very much like an elephant, like it even feels like it looks like the texture of the skin. When you look at the surrounding area, which people never do, it all looks the same. So that means that the elephant would have had to petrify into a particular kind of stone, and then all of everything around it would petrify into the same kind of stone. So I lean towards pareidolia with that one, even though it looks so, you know, stunningly like an elephant. And a lot of these mountainscapes, when you see the facial features, they're not accounting for the fact that the eye would have been one tissue, the cartilage of the nose would have been another. Why would, if it's a titan laying on its back that's petrified to give us a mountain range, why would the nose petrify to the exact same material as the bone? Right? These are questions that a lot of people are not asking. They're not paying attention to shadows and foliage and snow in some cases, and the fact that if you were to just look from another angle, it would look like something completely different. So, you know, if you're gonna, it's one thing.
You can't mistake the fact that the elephant is a petrified gigantic elephant. Okay, there's
you mean the one I studied?
Absolutely. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah, well, some people were, you know, they might be convinced with 20 or 30, you know, but when you get up to 50, it's a pretty big number, especially with the specificity of some of those on the list. And sometimes I just look at that thing because I see it all every day, and I'm just like, is it really? You know, I'm the one who did all this research, and I still question myself. And I look at these stones, which I find everywhere, and it's like the anatomy of them is so, you know, so specific, and I can find them like that.
Well, we showed you the ones we found at the beach the other day, and let me tell you, there are thousands of those. So my question is, why hearts? Why can I find so many hearts? I can't find perhaps a liver, or I can't find this or that, but hearts seem to be everywhere. Why is that?
Yeah, thanks. You brought me back to something I forgot to complete in the talk. I was talking about boiled egg theory, which was my theory early on, because I couldn't explain why the organs would be found separate from the body, but I had all of these stones with all the specific anatomy, and I wasn't going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, there's a there, but I can't explain it, so I don't know, you know, I don't know why. But I figured that it must mean that the rest of the body has somehow been destroyed. I didn't know why. Eventually, I fixated on volcanism because of the pyroclastic flows. 1,500 degrees at the speed of sound is likely to destroy a body in short order, right? So what would happen to the organs as that's happening, as the outer portions of the body are being destroyed? Well, it's interesting because our chest and abdominal cavities are also big, thick, fatty sacs. Just like the heart is in a fatty sac, the chest and abdominal cavities are big fatty sacs. It's called the pleura. and those organs are our kidneys and our spleen and everything. They're all anchored in there, and then they're surrounded in their own protective coatings, which is the pericardium and the heart, and they're floating in water, right, or interstitial fluid, which is mostly water. So if the outer portion of the body were being destroyed, that would function like a pressure cooker. Well, what happens when you put things in a pressure cooker? They cook a lot faster with a lot less, time needed. So you've got these pressure cookers, and you've got forces that are destroying the outer portions of the body. That's going to harden the organs like an egg. And then eventually those organs are going to find themselves in the environment, maybe after being buried in mud and that process being finished. Or maybe it's an instantaneous thing that's happening, like we saw with the rubies in the microwave, that powder is being turned into the second hardest stone in a matter of seconds. Maybe there's a process by which that can happen, and that's going to cause the organs to harden. So a lot of people have asked me, why is it just hearts you're finding? I find lots of stones that look like kidneys, but it's not very specific. It's a kidney shape with little kind of indentation in the middle. That's a kidney. If I hold up a kidney-shaped rock and I go, this was really a kidney, people are going to look at me like I'm crazy, right? But if I've got a stone that's got 25 anatomical features and I can name them and I can show you that they're actually in the location they should be, that's more of a that's easier to buy.
More recognized. Else,
yeah, and one of the best endorsements I could have possibly been given has come from the man that I consider to be the greatest living cardiologist. Francisco Torrent Guasp died like 18 years ago, but his good friend, who was the one who facilitated his first dissection of a human heart, is a man named Manel Ballester, who has actually done a lot of presentations, like he was in the End of COVID series, presenting about the helical heart. He lives in Barcelona. He started the first heart transplant center in all of Spain, and he and Guasp were friends for years. I reached out to him. Someone eventually put me in contact with him. We had a video call. I went through like 10 of the best stones that I had with him, and I showed him the anatomy, and I pointed out the features, and he was blown away. And then I was going to give a presentation to a bunch of doctors, and I asked him before the presentation, hey, what do you think of this phenomenon? Do you see what I see? And he said, yes, it's an incredible discovery. Congratulations, exclamation marks. And he even put a trophy emoji. So like, this is a man I consider to be the greatest living cardiologist, because he's furthered Guasp's work, which has still not been integrated into cardiology programs, and most of the world, unless they've seen my videos or the helical heart, doesn't even know the true anatomy and function of the heart. So that's a pretty good endorsement, and that's from a guy who knows the anatomy inside and out.
Yeah, excellent. Mike, I've got a question from a lady here. She's right in the front.
Hello. As you may know, we live in an ancient part of the British Isles, and it's famous for its chalk streams and chalk hills. So there's so much calcium carbonate here, it's not even funny. And there's a local, about 20 miles from here, there's a church which remembers a giant, and it's in local folklore. And not far away, there's an enormous hill which is named Giant Hill, and on the side of that hill is a chalk carving. And I've always thought it was like, people always speculate what it's there for, and I always thought that it was like a tombstone. I always wanted to say here lies a giant, which is a chalk carving of a 165-foot tall man with a massive erection.
Oh, there you go.
Everyone loves that.
Titan porn.
May come from the sun giant, possibly in older times. But so my question is really, in terms of timelines, bearing in mind that this could be just crazy folklore, but I think there's always a grain of truth in things that endure like that. And the fact that we are full of these chalk streams, which I'm told are very rare in chalk grassland as well, and in the world it's very rare habitat. So I was just really wondering what, I'm very conscious of the fact that our timelines have just, I think we've been lied to an awful lot about how old things are. How long do you think that would, you know, how far back are we going for the time of giants?
Yeah, well, timelines is definitely something that's up for grabs as well, because carbon dating is very inaccurate after thousands of years. Lots of, I mean, if you look up dating techniques on Wikipedia, it's just a whole slew of different things that are settled science. But I know some, you know, very credible scientists who they're like, you know, the dating techniques are they're fabrications to justify their model. And so how old are things? I don't really go there. I don't know. I mean, is it thousands of years old, this realm, or is it hundreds or millions? Or my guess is it's far lower than anything that we've been taught. You know, I mean, you're getting into what is the nature of the universe kind of questions, and what is this place really? So I don't even speculate over the age of things, but my guess is it's a lot younger.
What do you think?
That was my thoughts entirely.
Oh, and as far as the chalk goes, I have no idea what.
No, I mean, the village that's alongside where the giant is, there are buildings there which go back 1,000 years. So, you know, like you can see from the record of the houses, they are literally, they go back past Tudor time, and the oldest one there had the number 976, AD 976, the stonework. So, and we know churches and the church records that are kept, we do have 1,000 years of history, but before that, who knows?
Yeah, well, outside of the geological narrative, we know that our history is a complete fabrication, and the timelines are off as well. I also around the UK, which is really, you know, you got places like Kinver and different sites whose names I don't know, where you have these sandstone dwellings. Those are very, very interesting. I got into a tiff with Paul Cook some years ago, because he was reporting and going to these different sites, and I really loved his work. I was a patron of his, and I gave him shout outs in many streams. And then we started butt heads over the biogeology subject, and he was turned off by the whole mud fossil crowd, because everything's a titan to them, right? Everything's a titan, and they're not incorporating the trees into their narratives, you know. So it's like you get all these people that are just like, it's just too narrow, the scope of when they're looking at all this stuff. And he's one of those people, and he started to come up with these narratives that these were man-made structures. Well, that they were obviously they were carved into, right? But the question is, did they carve into stone, or did they carve into wood, which would be easier with primitive tools? And I think that what you're looking at there with those sandstone dwellings, and I have a video called, I think it's Biogeology Lies and something else, because he started slandering me, and we we had a major falling out over this subject. And I was like, look, I'm not rejecting anything. I'm just saying you need to broaden how you're looking at these things, because what you're showing is not, he started invoking giant 3D printers as an explanation for how these sites had come about. I'm like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Now you're invoking a technology that you can't prove ever existed, and trying to explain it all based on that, when you can see the grain. And finally he had an image where some, you know, these things were fitted with electrical as well, you know, these dwellings. Like it was more advanced than it appears in what they tell us. And there were holes in the structure, and there were channels that had been carved. And when you go up to sandstone, you can see the micro layering, but if you rub it, you can rub away the layers. And these channels had the layering still there in them. So that layering would have had to have been destroyed when the channel was created, if they were just carving into sandstone. So I believe that when you're looking at Petra, you're looking at magnificent structures that were created out of wood, and then the petrification came after the fact with the flood and the high mineral waters, and then that turned to sandstone. And then the sandstone breaks down to sand, and then we use that for glass and everything. But where do we find the majority of sand in the world? In the Sahara Desert. When you look at Madagascar and Sri Lanka and these areas, you find these tree stumps are all over. I've gone in on live streams. You go in and you can tilt with Google Earth and you can look around from different angles and you can see the grain. You can see the color of the tree is still there. And then guess what? Those plateaus are where they're finding some of the best water in the world. So it really all dovetails perfectly with the tree theory. And so do all those sites in the UK.
Unbelievable. Mike, we're going to have to leave it there, I think. There's any more questions left for anybody else in the room? No. Mike, once again, thank you. That has blown most of our minds here, I think. So for those of you who are coming to Spain, we'll see Michael in September. But for now,
yeah.
Give it up
if
for
you're
Mike
not coming
Wilkerson.
to that, if you have to borrow money.
His channel, Scaling Spoon. Anything else you need to buy his book, see me, or go straight to his channel to purchase from him. Mike, once again, thank you so much for doing that, my friend. And I'll see you soon. God bless you.
My pleasure. Oh, just so you know, the recording needs to complete on your side because the video of your side is very blurry. But if you wait until it completes, then I should get good quality from both sides.
Perfect. Mike, thanks very much indeed. Take care, brother.
Bye,
see you
everybody.
Soon. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mike one more time. Thank you, Mike. God bless, man. Wow. Wow, that was mad. That's a lot of stuff in there. And I mean, it's just another angle of the way we do things, what we're looking at. We did flat earth. We've now gone into mud flows, gone into the rocks were alive, biogeology. Minds are going crazy. But Mike's great. If you want to go and see him,